What happens when a generation is raised on the earnest moral absolutism of a cartoon cucumber and the systemic fury of a funk metal rap rock band screaming about the American empire? For 2 decades, the experts and the elders assumed these influences would cancel each other out. They thought we'd eventually choose between the sanctuary and the streets. But they were wrong. We didn't choose one or the other. We fused them. And now they're looking at us, the Sunday school graduates who took the curriculum a little too seriously, and wondering why we're standing in the rubble of American civil religion, refusing to bow to the golden statues. Welcome to the Faithful Citizen. Today we're talking about the radicals you raised.
Yeah. Welcome to the space where conviction meets rhythm, where truth got a mic and the church gotta listen. This ain't Sunday talk, it's real life living. Faith in motion, the citizen's mission. We talk grace, we talk justice, we talk peace. Not the kind that conforms, but the kind that frees the world's loud with noise. We cut through division, this is the faithful citizen. Let's get to the wisdom.
It might sound like a punchline to a bad joke, or perhaps the fever dream of a 1990s youth pastor trying too hard to be relevant. But as I was scrolling on Threads and came across Joanna Whiteley's post, I didn't laugh. I felt it in my bones. She wrote, "I'm not a part of the generation raised by VeggieTales and Rage Against the Machine, only to be quiet now." Oof. You can say that again, sister. For a specific cohort of us, straddling the blurry line between Millennial and Gen Z, this isn't an absurd contradiction. It's our spiritual biography. We're the children of an accidental, volatile synthesis. We were raised in living rooms where the television alternated between a countertop of singing vegetables, teaching us that God is bigger than the boogeyman, and a stereo blasting Zach de la Rocha, screaming that some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. On the surface, these two cultural forces seem to belong to different universes. One is the pinnacle of suburban evangelical safety, a computer-animated Sunday school curriculum designed to teach biblical morality through silly songs and sanitized Old Testament narratives. The other is the sonic weapon of the radical left, a funk metal rap rock band spitting venom at American imperialism, capitalism, and the military-industrial complex. But if you look closer, they were teaching us the exact same lesson. Bob the Tomato, Larry the Cucumber, and their friends taught us that truth is objective, that God sides with the little guy, and that when a king commands you to bow to a chocolate bunny, an idol, the only faithful response is civil disobedience. Rage Against the Machine simply gave us the real-world names for the idols. We're the generation that internalized the earnest moral absolutism of singing vegetables and the systemic fury of the Molotov. And for the last 2 decades, the church leaders and parents who raised us have been waiting for these two influences to cancel each other out. They assumed we'd either grow up, get jobs, and forget the adolescent anger of rage, or we'd lose our way, leave the faith, and mock the VeggieTales' sincerity. They were wrong. Dead wrong. We didn't choose one or the other. We fused them. We didn't abandon the faith, we radicalized it. We took the Sunday school lessons about loving our neighbors and applied them to the very systems that are attempting to crush them. We took the memory verse about defending the fatherless, Psalm 82, 3-4, and looked at the border. We realized that you can't sincerely sing God made you special and he loves you very much, and then support policies that starve, deport, or shoot the very people God made special. The tension we're living in right now, the reason we're so exhausted yet so loud, is that we're trying to be faithful to the text we were taught while dismantling the culture that taught it to us. We're deconstructing, yes, but we're not deconstructing to nothingness. We're stripping away the whitewash of American civil religion to see if the radical, brown-skinned, empire-toppling son of a carpenter from Nazareth is still underneath. We're not quiet because we actually believed you. We believed you when you said God hates injustice. We believed you when you said we should fear God rather than man. The tragedy isn't that we changed. The tragedy is that we grew up and realized that many of you had been rooting for Nebuchadnezzar all along. If you want to understand the political theology of this generation, you don't need to read Bonhoeffer or Yoder, at least not at first. You need to watch VeggieTales. To the parents who bought VHS tapes at the Christian bookstore in the 90s, they were just safe entertainment. It was a way to keep the kids occupied for 30 minutes without exposing them to the violence or secular humanism of Saturday morning cartoons. But while we were sitting crisscross applesauce on the carpet, laughing at silly songs with Larry, we were being catechized in a theology of subversion that our parents never intended for us. Consider Rack, Shack, and Benny. On the surface, it's a retelling of the fiery furnace story from the book of Daniel, recast in a chocolate factory. But strip away the cute animation, and what's the core lesson? It's a primer on resisting the state. We watch three young believers who worked in a factory as laborers stand before a massive idol constructed by the owner and the government representing corporate state collusion. They were told that compliance was the only way to survive. The song literally sang, "The bunny, the bunny. Whoa, I love the bunny." It was a catchy anthem for consumerist idolatry and blind allegiance. And what did our heroes do? They didn't seek a balanced approach. They didn't form a committee to dialogue with Nebuchadnezzar about religious liberty exemptions. They stood still when everyone else bowed. They looked the most powerful man in the world in the eye and said, "No. You can kill us, but you can't own us." Then there was Dave and the giant pickle. We watched a small shepherd boy reject the armor of the king, institutional power, because it didn't fit him. We watched him walk onto the battlefield armed only with a sling and the conviction that God wasn't on the side of the massive, heavily armed Philistine, but on the side of the vulnerable faithful. The lesson was explicit. Size isn't strength. Military might isn't righteousness. The giant is always wrong, no matter how much armor he wears. And perhaps most radically, Josh and the big wall. We learned that when a city fortifies itself against God's purposes, when it builds walls to keep people out and hoards its power, God's instructions aren't to respect the border. God's instructions are to march around it, scream at it, and watch it fall. This was our catechism. We learned that right and wrong weren't determined by the laws of the land, but by the law of God. We learned that bad guys often look like kings, mayors, and business owners, and good guys often look like shepherds, prisoners, and outcasts. The great irony is that the very generation who bought us these tapes, who sat us down and told us, "Be like Dave, be like Daniel," are now horrified that we actually listened. They're shocked that when we see a state demanding total allegiance to a flag or a party, we see a giant bunny. They're baffled that when we see a militarized police force crushing the vulnerable, we see a giant pickle. They're angry that when we see a wall built to exclude the desperate, we don't see national security. We see Jericho. We didn't leave the faith, we kept the lessons. We're simply applying them to the systems our parents told us were off limits. We truly believe God made you special and He loves you very much. And we're audacious enough to believe that applies to the immigrant, the refugee, the queer kid, and the poor, not just the suburban family in the minivan. We're not rebels without a cause. We're Sunday school graduates who took the curriculum seriously. If VeggieTales gave us the moral categories of good and evil, Rage Against the Machine gave us the map to find them in the real world. While our youth pastors and parents were preoccupied with the dangers of secular music, policing our CD collections for parental advisory stickers, and warning us that listening to drums would summon the devil, they missed the irony. The guys screaming into the microphones were doing more to prepare us for biblical prophecy than the Safe for the Whole Family radio station ever did. While the church was obsessing over personal sin, swearing, smoking, sexual purity, Zach De La Rocha, Tom Morello, Brad Wilk and Tim Comerford, were screaming about structural sin. They weren't singing about broken hearts or parties. They were screaming about the military-industrial complex, the commodification of human life, and the blood on the hands of the state. They were the secular prophets of our adolescence. Like Amos interrupting a feast to tell Israel that God hated their festivals because they sold the righteous for silver, Rage interrupted our suburban slumber to tell us that the land of the free was built on the backs of the enslaved. When they roared, "Wake up!" It wasn't just a lyric, it was an echo of Ephesians 5:14. Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. They gave us the language for the rot we felt but couldn't name. We sat in history class hearing about American exceptionalism, and then we put on our headphones and heard bulls on parade. We saw the disconnect. We realized that the machine wasn't just a metaphor for a band name. It was the biblical powers and principalities. It was the system that chews up the poor to fuel the engines of the rich. And yes, let's address the elephant in the room: the profanity. To our parents, the climactic refrain of killing in the name, "You, I won't do what you tell me," was evidence of rebellion, a sign of a hardened heart. But to us, it was a liturgy of resistance. In a theological context, that refusal isn't just teenage angst, it's the spiritual posture of Acts 5:29. We must obey God rather than human beings. When the order is to profile a neighbor based on the color of their skin, I won't do what you tell me. When the order is to prioritize the economy over the vulnerable, I won't do what you tell me. When the order is to bless a war that kills innocent civilians, I won't do what you tell me. Rage Against the Machine taught us that compliance with an unjust system isn't a virtue. It's complicity. They taught us that anger isn't always a sin. Sometimes it's the only appropriate response to the world as it is. They taught us that peace without justice is just quiet oppression. The church told us to be in the world, but not of it. But it was the band from Los Angeles that showed us what the world actually looked like. They stripped the paint off the empire and showed us the rust and blood underneath. And once you see the machine for what it is, you can never go back to pretending it's a garden. Now, we need to reclaim a word that's been weaponized against us: deconstruction. To the gatekeepers of American evangelicalism, deconstruction is a dirty word. It's a synonym for backsliding, a polite way of saying someone's decided to stop worshiping God and start sinning. They speak of it with a mix of pity and panic, as if we've all been infected by a secular virus that's eating our souls. But they're mistaking the destruction of the building for the demolition of the foundation. For our generation, deconstruction isn't an act of vandalism, it's an act of renovation. We're not burning down the house because we hate it. We're stripping the toxic paint off the walls because we realized it was poisoning our children and us. We're scraping away Christian nationalism to find the kingdom of God. We're chipping away at patriarchy to find the egalitarian gospel. We're sandblasting white supremacy to find the image of God in every human being. Why now? Why did the generation raised on VeggieTales suddenly pick up the scraper? Because we saw the receipts. We watched the very people who taught us that character counts in the 90s throw their unreserved support behind men who embody the antithesis of the fruit of the Spirit, simply to secure a Supreme Court seat. We watched our churches stay silent when black bodies were lying dead in the street, but get loud when a coffee cup wasn't Christmassy enough. We watched the pro-life movement defend the death penalty, the war machine, and the cuts to social safety nets that keep actual babies alive. The dissonance became deafening. We couldn't reconcile the Jesus we met in the Gospels with the Jesus we saw in the news. One was a brown-skinned refugee who had no place to lay his head. The other was a mascot for a political party that would have deported him and portrayed him as a white man. So we started stripping the paint. The resulting believer, the deconstructed disciple, confuses the census takers. We might not go to the megachurch with the laser light show or feel at home in socially sanitized Sunday services anymore. We might swear when we talk about injustice. We might have a drink on a Friday night. We're as deeply suspicious of pastors who fly in private jets and claim celebrity status as we are of the ones who've made every attempt to sanctify the empire and trade the gospel for power, control, cultural dominance, and a seat at Caesar's table. But ask us about the Beatitudes, and we're obsessively, painfully committed. Ask us about the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant, and you'll see a fire in our eyes that looks a lot like the Old Testament prophets. Ask us about Jesus, and you'll find that we love him enough to rescue his reputation from the institutions that have hijacked it. We're homeless in the current religious landscape, not because we've abandoned God, but because we're too Jesus-centered for the evangelicals and too religious for the secular left. We're standing in the rubble of American civil religion, holding the red letters of the Gospels and saying, I believe this part's actually true, and I'm going to build my life on it, even if I have to do it outside the walls. In the chaos of this renovation, we've made a critical discovery. Christian and Christ follower are no longer synonyms in the West. They're rapidly becoming antonyms. The term Christian has been hijacked. It's been hollowed out and stuffed with a political agenda, until it's no longer a description of a disciple, but a demographic category. In 2026, to be a Christian in the public square often signifies a voting bloc. It signifies a group that demands cultural dominance, protects its own tax-exempt status, and fights to keep the wrong people out of the bathroom in the country. It's a label of power. We're not interested in that label anymore. We're interested in the man from Nazareth. We're making an ontological shift, a fundamental change in our state of being, from being members of a religion to being followers of a way. And the distinctions are stark. First, there's the shift from power to presence. The Christian seeks to control the halls of power, the Supreme Court, the presidency, the school board. They believe that if they can just compel everyone else to live by their rules, the kingdom will come. The Christ follower seeks to be present in the margins. We understand that Jesus didn't spend his time lobbying Pilate. He spent his time dining with tax collectors and touching lepers. We don't want to rule Caesar's empire. We want to wash the feet of the people Caesar crushes. Second, there's the shift from safety to sacrifice. The Christian wants a safe country with high walls, locked doors, and a weapon in the nightstand. Their fear of loss shapes their theology. The Christ follower understands that love is inherently unsafe. We know that following Jesus is a vocation of downward mobility. It means risking your reputation, your comfort, and yes, your safety, to stand between the oppressor and the oppressed. A theology that prioritizes your own safety over your neighbor's survival isn't Christianity, it's just survival of the fittest dressed in church clothes. And third, there's the shift from compliance to resistance. The Christian reads Romans 13, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, as a blank check for the state, provided the state wears the right political colors. They value order above justice. The Christ follower reads Romans 13 through the lens of Romans 12. Do not be conformed to this world. We understand that our allegiance to Jesus relativizes every other loyalty. When the state acts like a beast, compliance is idolatry. This is the synthesis we've been moving toward. This is where the cucumber meets the Molotov. The Christ follower we're striving to be is a paradox to the world. We're people who love our neighbors with the tenderness of Bob the tomato, offering grace, mercy, and compassion without condition. But simultaneously, we fight systems of oppression with the relentless, unyielding ferocity of Zach, Tom, Brad, and Tim. We're tender with people and ruthless with systems. We bind up the brokenhearted and we flip the tables of the money changers. We pray for peace and we disturb the false peace of the powerful. We're not choosing between holiness and justice. We're realizing they're the same thing. So, to the critics who look at our generation and wring their hands, lamenting that we're lost, woke, or divisive, you're mistaken. We're not lost. We're finally found. We've found a faith that's big enough to hold both the personal intimacy of God's love and the public demand for God's justice. We're not woke in the pejorative sense you use to dismiss us. We're awake in the biblical sense. We've heard the call to wake up, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and we refuse to hit the snooze button just to make brunch more comfortable for you. We see the world as it is, and we love Jesus too much to leave it that way. We're not divisive, we're simply shining a light. And as the scriptures say, light only feels divisive to those who have grown comfortable in the dark. John 3:19 to 21. We're the remnant. We're the bridge. We're the ones who'll be there to rebuild the church after the empire eats itself. And the empire always eats itself eventually. When the political alliances crumble and the golden idols melt down, we'll still be here, holding the blueprints of the kingdom, ready to show you what a faith looks like that doesn't need Caesar's permission to exist. We're the generation that knows how to hold the tension. We're the strange, beautiful, terrifying synthesis of our upbringing. We're the children who know how to stare down a tank with a song on our lips. We're the disciples who know that love your neighbor is a political statement. We're the believers who are willing to lose our lives to find them. So no, we won't be quiet. We won't just comply. We won't shut up and toe the line. We're the generation raised by the singing vegetables and screaming vocals. We know that God is bigger than the boogeyman, and we know that the machine needs to be broken. And we're just getting started. Thanks for listening to The Faithful Citizen. If you felt that in your bones today, if you recognize your own spiritual biography in that strange mix of the cucumber and the Molotov, then don't keep this to yourself. We're building a community of the found, and we need you to help others find the signal in the noise. Please take a second to like, subscribe, and share this episode. Leave a rating if you can. It helps more than you know. And don't let the conversation stop here. Head over to our Substack to join the discussion. We want to hear your stories. We want to know how you're navigating the rubble. Finally, a quick update on how we keep the lights on. We've launched a new paid subscription tier for those who want to financially support this work. I want to be clear, this is completely voluntary. We're committed to keeping all of our content freely accessible because we believe this message belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford a paywall. But if you have the means and believe in what we're building, your support helps us keep stripping the paint. Until next time, remember, God is bigger than the boogeyman, but the machine still needs to be broken.